Okay.
Working, not working?
Well, it is running. Let's just give it a few seconds. I think maybe it was like confusing the mute button with the end of the call or something like that. So I'm not going to press the mute button on Skype. And I'm also recording this on another recorder, so hopefully...
Yeah, it won't be the best audio, but oh well. Or it's maybe another recording on your computer or something like that. So.
Yeah, it's funny that you can't do these things in a simple way. You know, you would... After all these years of technological advances, you would think we wouldn't have to worry about this stuff. Okay, it says it's recording. I used this earlier today to record a conversation. Normally, I don't have these problems. I'm going to say I think it's going to work.
Conversation on creationism or...
Well, I've had a lot of discussions lately with people. The one I was having earlier today was actually about really kind of detailed stuff about biology and physics. But
yeah, you guys were talking about kin selection in your chat.
Yeah, we were talking about that too. It was with that Fathom guy. He's got some really interesting ideas about biology. He's very interested in kind of the very abstract stuff. Okay.
I don't know what to think about kin selection. It seems like might be good explanation of things like homosexuality, but not really good of. Well, I can see why someone would have objections to it anyway, based off of having a individual like reproductive structures. So,
well, I mean, the basic.
I can see why.
I guess the basic argument is that you can't say something like alarm calls in squirrels are explained by that unless you would also then falsify the theory. Like, unless if it predicted sibling altruism, then it would be falsified by sibling rivalry, right? You can't have it both ways. You can't say it explains these exceptions if it's not falsified by the general case, right?
I don't know. When sometimes an animal symbiosis is helpful for both animals. And there's other examples where animals just kill each other over resources. So,
there can be all kinds of explanations.
Might be certain circumstances, like the changing circumstances is really what makes the driving evolution in certain ways. And
the point is, you would need a more detailed explanation of something like the alarm calls. You can't just wave your hand and say, well, it's just because we are selected to be altruistic, because then you have a bird species where the baby bird kills its brother or sister and chucks it out of the nest. Right? And that would, if the theory can't predict one without being falsified by the other. And there are way more cases of sibling rivalry than there are of things like alarm calls or, that kind of, siblings helping each other out or closely related individuals helping each other out. So you have to come up with a more detailed explanation. But I think we should probably set that one aside. The whole altruism debate is a separate debate.
Yeah, I was hoping that this would be hopefully we go through the article. But if you just want to lay out my...
Well, I mean, we can go through the article and you can make objections to it if you'd like to do that. But I really do want to get the Rothbardian
Case of Society
argument. Yeah, if you think you're going to if you want to go through the article, I just think we're going to get bogged down in the altruism thing or something else.
Okay, just... If we're not going to go through the article, I probably will. This is what I hope to be my start. This whole discussion is my start on YouTube. So, so I probably will write a critique of the article if we're not going to go through it here. If that.
Are you recording this? You should record this then.
Well, I thought you were going to post.
Well, no, I will, but I'm just saying, if you're going to start doing this yourself, you should probably.
Oh, my first conversation with you seemed like a pleasant person, so I didn't think that I'd have to worry about you distorting.
No. You don't have to worry about that. I'm just obviously the only thing you have to worry about is my software dying.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, so if you want to go through the article, I'm more than willing to do that.
Well, I would love to do that maybe another time, but
Okay.
seeing as how you are the one who suggested the conversation and you're the one recording it, I think that I should we should go with your desire to debate
Okay.
the Rothbardian argument. I don't.
Yeah, I just think that's the most interesting thing. So if you want to start out by presenting the case for anarcho capitalism, right, this Rothbardian case, and I'll let you do that for a while, and I'll try not to jump in as much as I want to. I guess don't go on for 20 minutes, but go on for like 10 or 15 minutes, however long you need to lay it out, and then I'll go through my objections to it.
Just probably just something much shorter than that.
Okay. All right. Well, take it away.
Sure, no problem. No, I would think that the argument for anarcho-capitalism is that it is fairly obvious to us intuitively, or just a sense of how, when we look at the outside world, that the best way to form a society and the best way to interact is through voluntary cooperation based off of private property rights in order to solve the problem of problem of common goods. So we have like this problem where there's a field nearby where we live, and we want to get wheat from the field. So what we do is every single person who takes a plant from that field prevents someone else from taking that plant. But also, because it's not under private property right now, it's just commons. Okay, there's no basis to stop anyone from taking more and more from the field. And so what happens is that we all, in our desire to do better for ourselves, run out of resources extremely quickly, and now like we're left with nothing. But in the case of where we had private property over that field, or best examples of the tragedy of the commons. There it is. The best example of tragedy of the commons given by economists is fisheries, is a common lake where anyone can go fish in the lake. And so what happens is that for something like salmon, although salmon ocean, but whatever, just any fish, you keep on taking more and more fish because someone else could just take as many fish as they want, and you'd be left with nothing. Whereas if there was a private owner of the lake or of the docks of the lake or something along those lines, what you could do is you could start to set, because the dock owner or the owner of the lake doesn't just think about right now for today, but says that he wants to be able to produce in the future. He's going to restrict access to certain people and ban people from fishing there if they overfish, if they break the rules that he's set out, and he'll use force to defend that lake, his own private property. And that's generally just viewed as okay, defending your own private property in any society, in all societies, really. All societies have a sense of private property, even communist societies. They make this distinction between personal property and the means of production, I think is not helpful, really. It's helpful for their ideology, not helpful in the real world, or how to create law in the real world. So we have private property to solve the problem of scarce resources. And we have the just general, just obvious to any person case that we shouldn't assault one another. And I think that there is extremely strong evidence that this is cross-cultural unless you have certain ideologies break that. So for instance, most people say it's wrong to sacrifice or like kill children. But if some civilization has an idea of, well, the sun god, or the gods of weather, we'll have a better season for harvest if we sacrifice a child. And so they will then do that. But I just think that's something that we should reject. And for the point of the early states, I think that they came about and they had been justified by religion, basically. This isn't really the Rothbardian case. This is like me using other anthropologists' work right now. But it's by using using ideology whether it be through religion or through an education system to indoctrinate people, that they can overthrow their innate sense of, well, it's just totally wrong to murder other people or steal from them, and we're not going to be able to have society otherwise. And I think the archaeological research, I think an objection one might make is that, well, there's been violence all throughout human history. I think that's something Steven Pinker makes in The Better Angels of Our Nature, but he was, I think, responded to thoroughly, and I think he should be rejected by anthropologist Brian Ferguson from Rutgers. He has a article. Hold on, I have it right here. Yep. Pinker's List, Exaggerating Prehistoric War Mortality, where the fossil record of just shows that we don't have like this really violent, like naturally violent societies in the past that some people believe we have. Okay. It's just generally true throughout that in any society, most people believe that you should respect private property and not assault each other. But then when it comes to the state, they have this basically ideological block that's implemented since, from a very early age to justify state power over others and state acquisition of resources that no one else can do. For feudalism, the state can just say, you own this tract of land even if you didn't homestead it, and now someone does that.
Okay. So can I break in and respond? Because you made a lot of points and I need to respond to them.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. So
you're taking notes, or I can try to tell you the point I was making again.
Yeah, I might forget if we go too long. All right. Sure. So of course, I agree that we use cooperation. We're a cooperative species, and that's a key part of our adaptation. We can't really live outside of societies. We can't really live as individuals. So, of course, we have developed this adaptation to form societies and to cooperate. However, that doesn't mean that we, or that those societies are based on some kind of recognition of, the inalienable rights of the individual, or that we naturally oppose violence. I think, there's plenty of evidence that we are extremely violent throughout all of history. I see that you want to transfer the sort of blame for that onto the state, right? You want to say that there's this big error that occurred, 5,000 years ago, and everything went wrong because of some error 5,000 years ago that prevented...
started the state formation in Uruk and Egypt, later China...
Right, and so somehow this big error, which is so terrible, nevertheless spread around the world and has kept us away from this utopian condition of peaceful, voluntary cooperation. Now, I think this is a utopian fantasy, and I mean, it's just basically wrong, but I'll get to that in a second. So you talked about private property.
Yep.
There is no private property in nature, right? There's only private property... Sorry, what?
Yeah, of course, yeah. It's a social construct. It's, intersubject. It's a social construct, and partially, if you look at what's it called? Territorialism in certain biological creatures, like some birds, wolves. They have a sense of territorialism that they've evolved to, which is, better survive by trying to kick out all the other animals in a certain area.
Right.
Yeah.
Animals will often be territorial, but that's not the same as private property within a modern society, because the difference is that they only own that territory to the extent that they can defend it with force, right? But in a state-governed modern society, I own things because there's a social construct that says that I own them. So, for example, I own a house, and there's a deed to the house. I don't have to be there defending it to own it. And someone can't take it away from me by just moving onto my land or into my house, right? Because the state guarantees my ownership of that property, right? The state grants me the right to use that property in certain ways. and to own it, to transfer it, and so on. So this concept of private property exists only when there is a social environment that enforces it. It does not exist in a state of nature. You talked about solving a tragedy of the
can we stay on that point?
Well, sure.
If you want to move on.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
I focus on that one point, and then we can go to the other objections. I would say that I simply don't view it as true that private property is necessarily a social construct created by the state. I think that we have plenty of evidence that people will just, again, based off of, we have this problem of the commons, where in any society, if it's not based off of just pure, love of your neighbor. So you can have small societies that don't really have private property, like tribal societies. But, any society that's above, 150, above like Dunbar's number or whatever, any large society. Okay,
well, I think even small societies have private property in the sense that, you make a bow or a spear, you own it. Usually you own your woman. Women are usually treated as private property. But
I don't know how much I have to see the evidence.
Well, you just read about any primitive society, but you have to read it without desperately trying to not see that. I think to not see it, but
for instance, and I know quite a lot about the what are they called, and what's the one tribe in Brazil?
Well, maybe you're thinking of the Yanomamo people.
No, those are really violent.
Yeah, they're really violent. Yeah.
Thinking of the Piraha.
Okay.
Yeah, so Piraha were these people that the reason most people know about the Piraha is because of this debate between this linguist and Noam Chomsky talking about it starts with an R. I'm forgetting the exact term. Recursion. There we go. Recursion, whether it's necessary in humans. And so what this linguist did is he went to the Piraha and he saw, okay, well, they don't have any language. That's just like why people know them. But it doesn't seem to me that the Piraha own their women. And, I'd have to see like a source to show that, like, yeah, I certainly, I think there were a restriction of women's rights in Western society and for purposes of, just pregnancy, that the man is going to have to do and like have the career in the household. I just don't know.
Well, among the Yanomamo, women are seized in war often and taken as wives and, raped and owned. And that's actually a pretty typical pattern of behavior. That was pretty typical for most Native American societies. That was typical for most, pagan societies in Europe. That was typical in most African societies. That's pretty normal human behavior.
It's not how I understand the historical
record. You don't know that the Romans took slaves?
I think there were slaves. Nothing like chattel slavery. Which
you don't think the Celts and the Vikings took slaves? You don't think they raped women?
I think they did. I don't know how much for like. Well, that was not the statement that slaves exist.
You're saying you're claiming there's one tribe that didn't have this concept of ownership. I don't know that one tribe, so maybe that's true. I don't know, but I can name a lot of examples where it's false, right? But
you said the Native Americans. You said that the Celts. Like these are like big populations. Yeah. I gave you a source for the reasons I disagree with the idea that human society, prehistoric societies, are extremely violent.
So
that is Brian Ferguson. So if you gave me a source,
you can find sources for anything. You can take any claim and find a source for it. It's meaningless. You have to look at all of the, the bulk of the data. You can't just say, I found a source that claimed Margaret Mead said the Samoans were peaceful hippies. Well, it turns out she was lying, but there's a source. So, academic sources don't really mean anything. You have to look at a large body of historical data or evidence If you don't think the Native American societies were violent, you just have to go and look into it yourself. I can give you links later. I can't give you a source for everything I believe right now.
The Aztec. I mean, that's what I was saying. Later, just give me a source. I'll look at it. Because right now, I'm just thinking, oh, this is just wrong.
I mean, I can give you a source.
There's nothing that. So just let me finish on this one point. So there's like nothing that you could like if we have a dispute on history, it's kind of impossible. Or like we could spend like 10 hours going through sources of each.
We could also talk about basic logic. Basic logic should be enough to convince you that humans are incredibly violent. You don't need historical evidence, and it's very simple. Human beings reproduce to excess, right? The excess population has to die off somehow. And at least in the Americas, there were almost no diseases that killed people before the age of reproduction. And there weren't a Google Native Americans, when the Europeans showed up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which there would have been if they had simply reproduced and, their population had just grown naturally without something to wipe out the excess population. I mean, there's tons of evidence of extreme violence among Native Americans. If you're denying that, you're just denying basic facts. You've heard about the Aztecs, right? Sacrificing people and throwing them down pyramids. You've heard about the Iroquois and the Algonquian torturing people to death over days. The Plains Indians used to go raiding each other for horses and women and killing each other, scalping and all this stuff.
The Apache, obviously, yep. There are plenty of warrior.
So I'm appealing to general knowledge. I'm not appealing to a specific.
My only problem is the statement of most or all. I can probably come up with countless examples of this.
I can't come up with any counter examples. But again, it's also just basic logic. Something has to kill off 50 to 75% of the children born to maintain a human population.
So, sorry, say that again?
Something has to kill off 50 to 75% of the children born before they reproduce to maintain a human population.
Well, so I think this goes off of your article where, what is it? Life is violent. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
In the 30 years from, I'm just quoting you, in the 30 years from 1980 to 2010, the population of Africa more than doubled. That is a natural rate of growth for a human population without environmental constraints. Actually, it is a low estimate because there were famines, horrific wars, and deadly diseases in Africa during those years. Okay, so, and also many people had access to modern birth control. Nevertheless, the population doubled in less than 30 years. So doubling every 30 years is a very conservative estimate of a natural rate of human population growth without war, disease, famine, and modern birth control. Many populations have grown faster than that. Okay, so, I just think that looking at, I think that's how I think that you laid out your beliefs pretty well. You believe that humans are,
life is intrinsically violent because life has the capacity to reproduce to infinity and the environment is finite, right? So even in your tragedy of the commons, unless you have something that reduces the population, it doesn't matter what, if you have this lake tyrant that somehow owns all the docks to the lake or whatever, and somehow is able to defend all the docks to the lake, notice it's a tiny lake, not an ocean. Even if you had that, the population is going to grow to the point where they have to fight over resources, where cooperation isn't enough to stay alive, where you have to take something from somebody else to live, because the amount of food is less than what is required to feed the people who exist. So competition ultimately rules in nature. Cooperation is possible, but competition is necessary and inevitable.
Okay, well, for this theory of just humans endlessly reproducing, and if there's no war, the population will skyrocket. I mean, I think this is just refuted by Western and Japanese or Asian society, Japan specifically.
Well, this is a very modern thing, right? With modern birth control and modern.
Well, I don't know that.
You don't know that the Japanese population.
Well, I don't know if
the Japanese were living at the brink of starvation, and they went to war to try and seize territory to feed their population.
Okay.
And the Japanese have been incredibly violent throughout history. I'll link you to like the Shrine of the Noses, where they went to Korea and they just chopped off thousands of noses off people and brought them back as trophies. You know, I mean, your idea about this peaceful, loving humanity is just nonsense. Humans are violent. Humans are you know, war. We fight wars every society that exists. Except maybe you can find some, I don't know, really obscure example where there's no record of it, but pretty much every society that has ever existed for which there's a record, it has been engaged in warfare.
Okay, if I may just get a word in here, it's just that I don't think that it's clear that there's a quote unquote natural. Well, no, is this a quote? Well, I don't think there's an idea of like a natural rate of growth absent war, because I believe in economics. I believe in people, choosing things. And Gary Becker, a Nobel Prize economist, analyzes this. You can scoff at it, but
I will scoff at it. That doesn't mean anything to me. These authorities.
Well, and I'm trying to cite you like.
Go ahead. Yeah, just give me the argument. Yeah, I don't care who the authority is. Just give me the argument.
I mean, like I could give you the argument, but just if you want to look for yourself.
I'm not interested in what somebody says. I'm not going to go read every single thing.
I wouldn't be offended if you said like war mortality is this in the past, and you cited me like.
Well, I can link you. I can link you to stuff if you're really denying this. But I think it's just, I don't see why I would have to do that. I'm not playing a debating game. I'm just telling you the truth. You can go and verify it yourself. Now you might not want to believe it, but I think the evidence is there in every history book, every archaeology book.
Pretty unfair that the only reason I don't accept it is because I'm being irrational or something.
Well, you can make an argument against it. I'm willing to hear the argument, but
I am making an argument, but
no, you were citing a source, and I'm
that you're interrupting me.
Okay, so go ahead and make the argument.
Sure, that people have rationally choose how many children they want to have. And there are plenty of reasons to do so, as well as that I just don't accept that there are like no diseases that would like lower the population or keep the population in check. And even if that's totally false, well then it simply could be the case that people are not having this natural birth rate, that you're using Africa from 1980 to 2010 to kind of justify this natural birth rate.
No, I'm not. I'm using that as a very low estimate. I mean, I could use the birth rates of
the
Amish who double every 20 years.
Yeah, it's the exact opposite of like. Well, it's very favorable. It's a very favorable estimate for you.
No, it's a very unfavorable. It's just a conservative estimate. I'm using a very low estimate of what humans are capable of in terms of fertility. Obviously, humans can double faster than that. There are lots of populations that are doubling faster than that right now.
Sure.
Nigeria alone is. I mean, but the Amish are. The Orthodox Jews are. There's all kinds of populations that double faster.
Jews in Brooklyn, sure, no problem. Again, you could probably find tons of different people who have this, skyrocketing growth rate. American conservatives are another one.
Well, they're not reproducing that fast, but the point is that if
faster than everyone I've seen, this is from, I won't say who it's from, just the data I've seen has been that American white conservatives reproduce basically more than any other group besides like Hasidic Jews, maybe the Amish, and Latinos.
But they're really, even now though, they're just slightly above replacement. So they're nothing like the Nigerians or the Afghans, or like they're not like fundamentalist Muslims or Jews or Amish. No. They're just faster than everybody else in a population that has relatively low fertility.
No, they're well above replacement. Like whites in general are not above replacement. Like American conservatives are very, very high.
Well, do you know the fertility rate?
And white liberals are very, very low.
I can look up the fertility rate for that. I don't think it's that high, but I'll just look it up.
Sure, no problem. You want to take time to look that up, or do you just want to do that sometime else?
Oh well, yeah, I can just put it in the notes. I'm gonna go on record as saying it's not very high. It's just it's a little bit above 2 children per woman, I think.
Okay. Well, to make an appeal to authority, the reason I'm saying that is because it's a claim that a researcher I trust a lot constantly makes, and that's Ryan Falk. He constantly makes that claim. So,
I don't think he makes a specific. I don't think he says it's higher than, like, I don't think he says it's like higher than the Nigerians or something like that, right?
Well, I don't know if he said that.
It's not that high. I'm just saying it's not that high. It might be. It's above replacement. It's not that high. That's all I'm saying.
Higher than most American populations.
Yeah, it's higher than most American populations. Yes.
Sure. Okay, then we're in agreement on that. Then I don't.
Yeah, that's all I said. It's not that high. I didn't say it was. I said it's just barely above replacement because it isn't that high. It's not like it's not doubling every 20 years or something like that. But like we were, this really just a tangent. So the point that I think, one of the points that I think you're missing is that the people who reproduce are going to replace those who don't. So you can't have this supposed rational choice about the number of children you want. If your supposedly rational choice is I'll just have 2 kids, everybody who makes that rational choice disappears eventually. They're swamped by people who make a different choice, which is I want to have 5 kids or 10 kids, right?
Our case selection?
Well, our case selection is bogus, but I mean, it's sort of irrelevant too, because
it's not bogus.
Because no, all you're saying, in our case selection then, what you're saying is, the people have 5. Hold on. The people have 5, but 3 of them die, right? So you still have that high rate of death. So you've got to have that high rate of death to keep the population in check, which is what we were debating.
A high mortality rate. Well, no. What were you just saying? The whole point of our... No, hold on. You were just saying that you can't have like 2 kids because everyone else will just have 10, or like you'll have 5 kids. And therefore you'll be a fool because now you're getting replaced.
No species and no population of humans in the long run will exist if they only have 2 kids. That's just because that's not replacement level fertility. They will eventually disappear. That's guaranteed.
Or humans, started making rhinoceros disappear. Rhinoceroses have an extremely low reproductive or fertility, they have extremely low number of children.
Well, it's not below 2 per female.
No, it's not below 2.
I mean, it can't be, right?
Comparatively, of course not, but it's very low.
Well, it may be low in the sense that it's like 5 or 6 or whatever if the female lives a long time. It's not low like 2 or something like that. But the point is that built into nature is this source of instability, that populations tend to grow exponentially unless something stops it, right? Something externally has to impose limits on population growth, because if there's not some external limit that's imposed, then evolution will just keep selecting for high fertility, right? Evolution always selects for the highest possible fertility that leads to surviving offspring. So
even in that case, sorry, continue.
What?
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, I interrupted you. Continue.
Well, no, I think I was finished the point. Something has to kill off most of the children for any species in the long run. That's just the way it works. And that's been true for human beings for all of our history. We're just in a very weird period in our history because we discovered new sources of energy and new ways of producing food. And also we have acquired birth control technologies, so that has caused us to have very low fertility in certain parts of the world, but that is not stable, right? And you can tell it's not stable because you can see the demographics are shifting very rapidly, and the population is still growing, quite rapidly as well, right?
It's demographics are shifting mostly because of immigration rather than
globally it's because of reproduction.
Well, yeah, globally definitely because of reproduction, sure.
So Anyway, I mean,
So
let's.
even in that situation, even with most animals, if they reach carrying capacity, just going off of math, just basic math and Malthus, I guess just to cite back where the ideas originally came from, they just starve. So why is it
they start.
necessary
No, well,
that
they
you
fight.
war, they starve?
Well,
They
if
just
your
starve.
child is going to die, if you don't feed that child, you're going to go to war to get food for that child. And if you don't, you'll be selected against, because the person who does go to war to get food for their child will pass their genes on to the future.
Why have that child if you know it's going to starve, or unless you win
Because
a
you're a
highly
reproducing
improbable
machine.
victory?
Why do oysters produce 1 million offspring when only 2 on average are going to survive to adulthood?
Because they don't act.
Because they don't what?
Human beings, they don't act. They can't they don't have free will. Humans.
Okay,
or
but
even
then what you're saying,
even if you don't believe in free will,
it doesn't matter
humans
though.
are
If
intelligent.
if you have, well, then this intelligence is maladaptive and will be eliminated if that's what it chooses. If it chooses not to reproduce or not to fight for its children, then it will be eliminated by natural selection and replaced with a different kind of intelligence that is willing to fight for its children. But I will claim to you that that's the kind of behavior that we have seen throughout all of human history, because that's the only kind of behavior that could evolve and could last over a long period of time. Anything else would be eliminated.
Most cases of natural selection is animals becoming slightly more efficient, slightly better, using less energy than they would have to. That's that's where most natural selection takes place. If that's the case, then intelligence would be a very good thing when stopping potential pregnancies, simply because now I don't have to waste all this time having a pregnancy. And then if the child survives,
the whole point of any behavior of an organism is to reproduce. It's not like adaptive to say, oh, well, I'm going to save energy by not having offspring. That's the exact opposite of adaptive. You might think that's a good choice for me personally. I don't want to have kids, waste of energy. But in terms of what is going to get selected, that's going to get selected out. That's not adaptive, right? That's maladaptive. Having 5 offspring, having 2 of them die, and fighting to the death to get the other 3 to adulthood is a better strategy than having 2 or having none and living a peaceful life.
Well, it's only worth it if you're going to succeed in doing so. I think. Well,
it doesn't really matter if you know it.
Very obviously extremely costly, so I don't. I think it's very clear that it's not. But just to make another point, you could just stay at carrying capacity and reproduce. You don't have to have 10 children. Okay,
well, that's how nature works. The oysters live at carrying capacity in the lagoon, but they still produce millions of offspring.
But they don't have. Yeah, but they can't choose their and animals actually do adapt their reproductive rate depending on the environment.
But they always maximize the number of surviving offspring. That's what they're selected to do. They're selected to maximize the number of offspring that get to reproductive age and reproduce themselves, because that's the basis of selection. And if humans do something other than that, they'll be selected against. So
and sometimes that means not constantly going to war with your neighbors to try and because you believe
if you have no food, and your neighbors go to war against you and kill you, take your food, or maybe eat you and eat your children, and that allows their children to survive and reproduce. They win, you lose, they replace you. That behavior is being selected for.
Yeah, sure, but again, and this is where we're just going to have an impasse. You'd have to have evidence that that's actually, what was happening.
I have all of human history, all of biology, and basic logic backing up that assertion. You have nothing, but you don't like the implications of it. You have nothing but that.
I'm the one fighting force. You're not the one. You're just saying stuff like you're citing anecdotes and then saying
anecdotes. What anecdotes?
On my side.
All of human history.
Yanomami, you're citing the Aztecs.
Yanomami is not an anecdote. It's a well-documented example of a primitive people. But what about World War II? What about World War I? What about the 30 Years'
human
War?
tribes?
Dude, the history of humanity is just war, 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 war. Go through any history book and just read about...
We're going to need to
what?
Go to another point. I think we're not going to get past this point.
Okay,
I think
well, can I also address...
I think that we both laid out our arguments pretty thoroughly, and someone else could see it. Maybe we should move on at this point.
Okay, so can I address the point about the lake?
Make your final point. I won't say anything. Sorry.
Just the point about the lake. I mean, I don't see how... You seem to assume... First of all, you assume there's some private property that exists without some way of enforcing it. So I guess everyone has to defend their private property personally, which means that anybody who's able to take it over, or any 5 people who join together, can take it from one other guy. You use this very contrived example of one guy who owns an entire lake as a solution to the tragedy of the commons. This is very contrived, right? Somehow he manages to own an entire lake and then chooses to regulate it for, I guess, his long-term benefit. But
could buy it from others. Sorry,
what?
Continue. He could, if he couldn't homestead it, he could buy it from others.
He could, well, I don't know what he would buy it with, but it's this very contrived example, right? I mean, how does one guy acquire an entire lake?
I mean, how does one acquire huge swaths of land? Again, if he can't homestead it himself, he can trade with others for the land.
He's going to homestead a lake. What does that even mean, homestead? How is he going to... Who was there before? Did he just... Are you thinking about some brand new landscape and then people just walk into it and then as soon as they step foot on some piece of land, they own it? And that's private property and then they defend it? Or what is the...
Okay, homesteading is what's most described as the Lockean theory of homesteading is what's most described as how humans believe one acquires property, and this is based off of the intersubjective consensus between people of property. That is, okay, so you go to the store and you say, I want to buy those Skittles from you. Okay, well, when you pass over the $3 and you get the Skittles, okay, nothing's changed about the $3 or the Skittles. There's no physical difference between them. What's different is that people now view you as owning the Skittles. And people now own this store as owning those $3.
Right, it's a social construct that's enforceable by the law.
It's a social construct.
That's enforceable by the law in that society, right? It's part of that society's rules that if,
And we fundamentally agree that there has been law in pre-state societies, and that there large pre-state societies, the proto-cities, that there has been law for, and not just the proto-cities, but also examples today you could find.
What are you talking about? Which ones?
Çatalhöyük,
You're claiming something about an archaeological site, one archaeological site, for which there is no historical evidence, there's no written language, there's just a bunch of structures, and there's artwork on the walls and stuff like that. How do you know how they lived, or whether they had laws, or what the form of their economy was?
Well, if they have a large society, don't they need to have laws?
Well, yeah, and so they probably had a mechanism of law enforcement. How do you know they didn't have that?
Well, I'm not saying that they didn't. I'm saying that they didn't have a state.
How do you know that? What do you mean by state? I mean,
a government that monopolizes all the one institution, I guess, to decide which law institutions are legitimate or not.
So you don't think that this...
even in common states, the state allows private arbitration, doesn't outlaw it.
So you think that this place, for which there are no historical records, fits your... You can look at the archaeological record. That's it's not the archaeological record doesn't preserve things like the structure of their society, like whether they had a hierarchical power structure.
How do we learn anything about prehistory then?
What?
How do we? Well, we know about their power structure because we know that there is no there's no palace, there's no central buildings. They're all equal. This is if you just look up Çatalhöyük.
Well, I'm familiar with the archaeology of it. I just think you're sort of jumping to conclusions about it that fit your narrative. But every early civilization that for which we have historical records had a hierarchical power structure, so what you're calling a state, right? A kind of monopoly on violence, an aristocratic class, a military. They fought wars. The people at the top ruled over a large number of people at the bottom. So for every one of those examples, that's the case. And you've had to go back to some really distant past example to try and claim that this thing existed. For an example for which there's no evidence about the structure of their society.
Well, hold on. It's generally accepted that there is no hierarchy at Çatalhöyük by archaeologists.
Maybe
who are not anarcho capitalists. Well, I'm trying to find it for you right now.
I'm sure that I know the archaeology of that place. I don't know how you could jump to those conclusions. And look, people jump to all kinds of conclusions based on their ideological beliefs, right? Their preconceptions. So it wouldn't surprise me if archaeologists have tried to make that argument, just like some biologists tried to claim that bonobos were peaceful, hippies who just made love, not war, and all that stuff. And
bonobos absolutely are, yeah.
No, they're not. Okay, I'll get some links for you at the end of this, but
bonobos, not pan troglodytes, not the
I know okay. The bonobos, yeah, no, they kill each other.
But like on what scale?
Well, pretty much the same scale as everything else does. I don't know. So the point is that the point I'm making. Look, the point I'm making is just that there was an academic myth that was constructed around them to fit a human ideology that really wasn't descriptive of them and had nothing. It wasn't about understanding the reality of them. So it's really a meta point that just because some archaeologist says, "Oh, look, Çatalhöyük was a bunch of hippies living in peace and harmony and they had an egalitarian society," that doesn't mean it's true. Maybe it's true because it's a long time ago. Maybe they had some special way of doing that we've lost, but
it's not that it couldn't be true. It's that we'd have no way of knowing, and
I'm saying it's a bit of a stretch, and it's a bit of a stretch to base your argument on this one really ancient archaeological site that has very little evidence about the form of its society. When you have all these examples, like Sumer and Egypt and Mesoamerica and China and European civilizations
before the early states, that what you're talking about with Sumer and China isn't the form of civilization. You're talking about the form of state society, the very first state society.
So how did this horrible thing?
Civilization happened before then, like Çatalhöyük.
Maybe.
I don't even have to use Çatalhöyük. There are plenty of other examples. But Jericho before the Bronze Age.
Jericho didn't Jericho have big walls around it? Protect it from.
Yeah, like after the Bronze Age, it had like a palace after the Bronze Age. Before the Bronze Age, Jericho still existed, and it did not have this sort of hierarchical system that you seem to believe is necessary in all societies.
Well, yeah, and I think it is necessary precisely because it's a way of solving problems of cooperation, and you haven't. Your only attempt to explain how to solve a problem of cooperation involves something that's so implausible, like some guy somehow manages to own the entire shoreline of a lake. I mean, this is just so contrived. How can you not see that you're just deceiving yourself? Come on. How could that occur? And if the guy doesn't manage to control the entire shoreline of the lake, then the tragedy of the commons occurs, right? So your notion of private property doesn't solve the tragedy of the commons, even if you could create this private property and actually have private property without the state. Because, you'd have to...
So someone thinks about the future, okay? So if I think about the future, I think I want the fish in the lake to survive, and I want to profit off of this for the next 50 years or the next 20 years or however long I'm going to be left owning this lake on this earth. Okay, someone who just thinks about, well, I need to get as much fish as possible right now. They're thinking about next couple year basically.
No, but the point is, this doesn't matter.
And why? But then you would buy up the lake because you obviously have, you have a time preference in the future. So you would buy up the lake. You buy the lake from people who value the lake less.
No, you're not going to be able to, because here's why. So like, let's say that a whole bunch of people own little pieces of the lakeshore to begin with, right? And you're like, well, I value this lake and I don't want to overfish it. I want to buy up all the property around it. So I'm going to make some money to buy it by fishing. Well, guess who makes the most money? It's the people who fish the most. So even in this hypothetical society, the people who are the most exploitative of the resource are the ones who are going to acquire the most wealth and the greatest ability to control it. So it's just not going to happen in this contrived manner that you need to make your thing work. I mean, you can come up with some Rube Goldberg thing where it all happens to work, but it's just contrived. I mean, somebody has to own the entire shoreline of the lake. What about the ocean? What?
Because it happens that, I mean, so any example of private property is just refuted to solve the tragedy of the commons, just wrong, because obviously there can't be any property acquisition without the state. So therefore anarcho capitalism is refuted because the state is necessary. Well,
I think the state is necessary for private property to exist in the form you're describing. Just let me finish the sentence, then you can disagree. I think the state is necessary for private property to exist in the manner you're describing, like little plots of land that are owned by people that they don't have to constantly fight for, and that they can manage it for long-term good. That it requires some organization that guarantees their ownership of it, because otherwise they have to constantly be in a state of war, and then they would just be fighting all against each one against all. There wouldn't be some peaceful voluntary cooperation. And there has never been any place in the world where this thing that you're claiming existed.
Okay, Iceland, Ireland, literally Pennsylvania,
Ireland,
and all the proto-cities.
Ireland had feudal chieftains who were constantly raiding each other and fighting each other, and they ruled over the peasantry, and the church also ruled over the peasantry, and they had taxation. So I really don't know what that's supposed to be. How's that supposed to be this anarchist utopia?
Okay, what? So.
Do you want me to link you a history of Ireland? I can do that. I know the history of Ireland fairly well.
Yeah, but you could voluntarily go into certain what are they called? They're not like Scotland. It's
the Highlands were in Scotland, but that was a wild tribal region.
Yep. That's where the taxman, TAK, taxman existed, and they were like the feudal owners of Scotland. But I can just what is it called? But you could join the associations in Ireland. It wasn't like you were just bound by your family like you were in Scotland, in the Highlands. So you could just voluntarily leave, and then
go where?
You can't leave Ireland because, I'm sure they had some sort of
the land was divided up, and people owned plots of it, and there was an aristocracy, a feudal aristocracy that ruled over the peasantry, and there was also the church that ruled over the peasantry, and there was also a lot of fighting amongst the various clan chiefs. So I don't see how that's an example of this voluntary, peaceful, market-based society. And they had basically no markets, pretty shitty economy, right?
Well, yeah, you had anarchy before civilizations, sure, but saying that it's pre-civilization is because of there not being a state. I think that's just making assumptions, really. I think it's
it's not making assumptions. It's reasoning.
Before, after.
Well, no, it's well. Okay, first of all, you see this pattern recurring all over the world in different places, It's basically a universal thing that whenever you have a large-scale society, you have a hierarchical power structure that imposes a monopoly on violence. Whenever you have a market, you have a state. Okay? There's no trade between strangers unless you have a state that creates the rules of the markets. There's no markets without the state. And so I have all the evidence that fits my theory, and I have a theory that says why it's that way, which is that you have to solve problems of cooperation by solving the prisoner's dilemma or the tragedy of the commons or the free rider problem or whatever, using coercion to eliminate the option to defect. So I have laid out this theory very clearly. So it's not just an assumption. It's, hey, there's a theory, and hey, it fits all the evidence.
Well, I don't know how much you have a theory of society as much as you have a theory of social interaction. You have, social interactions extremely important in society. Like, that's one important part of it. There's plenty of other things you could go to, such as the genetic desire to want to be with other humans. Loneliness is extremely painful for humans. Just going to the example of the lake. So I guess the reason that we don't have a tragedy of the commons is because the state sees that there's all these people who are these property owners around the lake, and then it decides, well, the way we need to solve this is that we need to have just one owner of the lake, or we have to have like an agreement between all that we will enforce between all the owners of the lake, or the relatively, or owners of the ports or whatever. And so I guess that's the solution to that problem in your head, right?
Well, I mean, the state is the meta owner of all the land and resources, right? I mean, we can go back to this homesteading thing you were talking about. That's not how land is acquired. Land is acquired by conquest, by war. The homesteading that happened in the American... Wait. Just let me finish. The homesteading that happened in the American West was a system that was set up by the government. It was a set of rules that the government created. Like, you can go here and you can have so many acres of land, and we'll lay out the territory that you're allowed to claim, and then you have to abide by these rules. And if you don't abide by the rules, we're going to take away the land. That's how homesteading worked in the prairies and the Great Plains. There were earlier people who kind of like went out on their own and created little villages or little fur trading posts and stuff like that. Some of them got killed, some of them didn't. But homesteading, as in dividing up the land into a bunch of little chunks, that was done by the state. And, it was like a lot of land was given to the railroads to finance the railroads, and then the railroads would sell it to farmers at, lower rates. So land is not acquired by people just, walking onto it and then using it. Land is acquired by people who have the ability to seize it. And that's always, a lot of people working together to seize it, because they're usually seizing it from a bunch of other people who are occupying it, who are working together to oppose it. The only exceptions are when the land's unoccupied to begin with, right?
Well, that's what the homesteading, unoccupied or, abandoned land is what when we're talking about initial acquisition, that's what we're mainly talking about. If you want to talk about like the government going in and, stopping Native Americans from, stealing, well, I'm only going to say stealing, just taking their land, sure, like the state was necessary to do that, to violate the property rights.
And to defend the homesteaders from being attacked by raiders, and also to prevent the homesteaders from fighting amongst each other.
Well, fighting against each other, they'd have agreements, they have this understanding that they're going to this, basically from their point of view, because they don't view the Indians' claims as legitimate, but virgin land. So, they'd be fools if they didn't have any idea of, well, if you get like have an agreement with all your neighbors that, well, if I like put like a series of poles and like around my property, or if I like claim, like plant a flag in the ground, and then so many acres like expanding out from where I plant my flag. That's now my land. If you don't have that, well, then you're just going to get a dispute between people who are just saying, no, this is my land, and this is my land, and so
right, and then they're going to fight over it, and the winner's going to take it, and that's how it works.
Well, no, because they don't. Because again, people,
you don't just walk out into some like landscape as an individual, plant your flag, and say, "Now I own this land." That's ridiculous. You have to defend it.
This is another thing. You don't seem to understand that war is super. Yeah, I'm being serious. I don't think that you understand that war is the super costly thing.
Oh, I get it.
It's not very clear that you're just going to always win in it, and so therefore you want people have a natural incentive to want to avoid war, and they'll form voluntary agreements in order to do that.
Well,
which is why they'll.
Okay.
Sure. Okay.
Well,
that's all. Basically it.
Okay. Well, first of all, war can be extremely costly. It can also be extremely beneficial. There are cases in which it's unavoidable if you want to live. Like if you only have enough food to feed half the children once they grow to adulthood, there's going to be a war. I mean, unless there's somewhere else for them to go. Right? And this has happened many, many times in human history. Populations have exceeded the carrying capacity of the landscape, and then people have split into factions to fight over resources. So in that case, you don't have a choice. You have to go to war, or you're just going to die of starvation. And yes, war is extremely costly and extremely beneficial. It can be extremely beneficial because you can seize land and you can seize women. Right? Those are the two main reasons people go to war. And so, yeah, you could lose. So what's the best strategy? Is the best strategy planting a flag and planting your anarcho capitalist flag in the ground and then telling all your neighbors, let's respect private property? Or is the best strategy to get a gang together, the biggest gang you can form, that is capable of fighting and defending a territory? Obviously, the gang is the better strategy. And the bigger the gang...
How big's the gang?
As big as possible.
Like 50%?
Well, like in the case of China, over 1 billion people. Right? The bigger, the better. Because the bigger gang can beat the smaller gang. So sure. You want to own land, you have to be part of the big gang and not the small gang, right?
But when you get bigger gangs, now you have to split up the resources between the big gang.
Well, you can conquer more territory, though, right? But no matter what, you're going to have to be part of some gang.
Not per person. Not necessarily per person. You can conquer more territory. You might now be able to say, like, this group can now conquer more territory, and if like 99% of the people are in that group,
you're going to have more territory than the people you kill or displace. The people you kick off their land are going to have less land than you guys have. I mean,
yeah, you guys, not you.
Sure. You have to share. Yeah, you don't get all of it, right? But the point is, if you don't go into some group, then you just end up dead. And you don't have any land. Because the people who form the group that are capable of taking over your little one-man state are going to take it over and wipe you out.
Well, you can form a group you can form an army to oppose an army invading you.
Yeah, that's a gang. And then that army needs a hierarchical power structure to make sure that the people in the army are actually willing to fight and follow orders and not just, be free riders on the army.
Okay. So, even if you can form this group, I think it's obvious that it isn't clear that you would get more land as a member of this army than if you were to just voluntarily agree with others to.
No. I'm saying you can't just voluntarily agree with others. There's no option to do that because other people will form the gang and take your land from you, all you people that aren't organized to defend it.
But then you just form an army voluntarily with other people. You fight against that gang, and then you just go back to, okay, well, obviously the way that we were going to do this was like the way we were going to originally homestead land. Now we're going to do that. Also, why again the costs of war? If these two groups do fight each other in this way, if you say you and I are these members,
when you say the
people
cost,
who are going to expand west. Okay, so we're going to expand west, and now we have to decide for ourselves. Okay, how do we want to do this? How do we want to claim land in the west? Okay, maybe someone could say, okay, what we should do is we should get 60% of us, or we should get this big group of us to go around and like say no one else can come on to this land. Okay, now if we do that, it's not clear that we'll get more land than we would have anyway. But other people can now form a group, and even if that is like 40% versus 60% or 30% versus 70%, war isn't so simple as like having just the double number of people means you're going to win. Like you could still
but okay.
Now it's like
let me address
disaster.
it. You're just sort of going on
everything.
Yeah, I get your point. I get your argument, and I also know exactly why it's wrong, and I've pointed this out now a lot. You're just assuming that these people are going to, cooperate without some sort of force that forces them to do it, right? Like, it's a free rider problem. If you are part of this group and you say, well, let's have a voluntary army, well, what's your best strategy? If the other people are going to form a voluntary army and defend this territory, your best strategy is to say, well, I don't want to go to war, but I'll take the benefit of them defending my territory. So they have to either say, well, look, either you go to war with us, or we'll take your land. And now what do you have? Oh, the state.
Okay, well, if you are like a small, small civilization in comparison, then yes, the states have the big states always conquered other land. I'm not denying that.
Yeah, but it's also the point you're missing is that you have to organize these people. You can't just do it voluntarily. There has to be coercion involved. There has to be some, you have to be forced to participate in this organization that defends the land.
You have to be bound to the agreement. Okay.
Well, how are you going to be bound to the agreement? What's going to bind you to
private law services?
Okay, private laws, but who's going to enforce the private laws?
The police, the private police.
The private police are going to enforce the private laws. What if
it's so ridiculous? You're just laughing at it.
I am laughing at it. It's absolutely fucking crazy. You're just totally missing the point over and over. How are these private police going to exist?
Very arrogant and very.
I am very well. It's just because it's ridiculous.
What?
Well,
you're ridiculous. You're just not making objections. You're making completely false statements. Like human civilization has always been about war. The war mortality is this huge rate. I can cite the Aztecs, and now therefore, no matter what
Mayans,
any research
the Iroquois,
shows, me is
the
automatically
Haida,
wrong.
The Tlingits, every single tribe of Native Americans, for example. Just for an example.
Most, just for example, these anecdotes. Yeah.
No, I can list every fucking Native American tribe and give you a historical account of them fighting a war.
Okay, you're being hyperbolic, but I think it'd be funny if,
I can literally do
how many
this.
Native American tribes can...
I've studied a lot of Native American history because it's one of my personal interests. The historical account of every single Native American tribe involves war. There's not a single historical account that does not involve war.
Okay.
But anyway.
What do you think about the, cannibals were named after the Caribs. What do you think about the Caribs and the Indians in the Caribbean that Columbus came upon, and he said, well, these people are so peaceful, I handed them a sword, they took it by the blade, and they cut themselves. What about those natives?
Well, they had never seen steel, but I'm sure they had war. They died out pretty quickly because the Spanish fucking annihilated them.
That they don't have a concept of war.
I think they had a concept of war. I haven't looked into their history specifically, but I'm sure if we look into it archaeologically, they're going to have war. But you could say, oh, these guys. Sorry, what?
You're just assuming.
Well, yeah, I am just assuming because, there's a pattern, right? Like every single Native American tribe or, whatever you want to call it, culture that I have read about, every single one of them, hundreds of them, all were warlike. They all engaged in war. The Huron, the Iroquois, the Algonquian, the Cherokee, the Cheyenne, the Comanche, the Crow, all the Northwest Coast tribes, the interior, the Chilcotin, people like the interior Salish of British Columbia. I mean, every single one of them, literally every single one of them, is known to have engaged in war. So Yeah, and there's this pattern in
like,
every single.
saying Iroquois is proving my points. Like the Iroquois are set up, to they're like what was five or something tribes that came together in order to oppose either I'm pretty sure the English, right?
Well, no, it was more like they were more allied with the British because they were trading with them, and they were fighting against the Huron, who tended to ally with the French.
Okay, so
but the Huron were an Iroquois tribe, and they used to fight against the other Iroquois tribes, and they also fought against the Algonquians and stuff like that.
Okay. Yeah. My only thing would be that just citing the ones you most know about.
Well, fine, but
maybe it could be that I am just wrong, and I'll accept that if I'm just wrong, that all native tribes were just hyper violent and constantly at war with one another. Even though if they're all constantly at war with one another, now they're obviously constantly losing, and that's
it's a necessity. It's a necessity because if they weren't, their population would have multiplied by a Google in 10,000 years, and there would be more native people than there are protons in the universe, right? So they reach starvation really quickly within a few thousand years of population growth.
People can't limit their limit their reproduction.
No,
because it just makes sense to have more children and then go to war.
You win by doing that. You win evolutionarily by doing that. So evolution will always select for that behavior. If you voluntarily choose to just have 2 children, and the tribe next to you has 5, and they're willing to go to war to feed those children, you're going to be
a lot of resources by having those children. If these are comparable, comparable tribes, then the one who doesn't have the children are going to win.
Maybe if you can use those resources to increase your fighting strength, but generally speaking, fighting strength, at least among the Native Americans, was just.
I thought they were at, when you say you have to have children, so you're talking about you have very young people, and you have to say, well, or infants, and you have to say, well, we need to win this battle, otherwise we aren't going to be able to raise them. Or maybe they say, first we go to war, and then we have the children after we win the battle. If we lose the battle, we kind of lick our wounds or whatever. Unless we get aligned, obviously.
But what does this have to do with anything? I mean, the point is, war is kind of built into the system.
Yeah, but my point is that it's not. And I think it's clearly that war hasn't been the cause for limiting population growth.
Well, I think it's actually pretty clear that it was the cause of limiting population growth.
Okay.
There's no other cause, and voluntary restrictions on reproduction would simply be selected against, and because it's not a good reproductive strategy, right? Anyone who adopts that strategy is going to lose if there are additional resources. So if you can produce one more child with the resources you have, and you don't do that, then somebody else has an incentive to take those resources and do that. Or basically, you're throwing whoever maximizes produces the maximum number of offspring that survive to reproduce themselves is going to make up the population in the long run, right? And the story of the Americas was one of population booms and busts, right? Civilizations expanding and then crashing. Like the Mayans, there's a ton of evidence of large-scale warfare among the Mayans, and also of overpopulation.
Okay.
There are tons of archaeological sites with people, lots of dead bodies and people being eaten in the Americas. And all the early explorers described fortified settlements. They didn't live in peaceful open villages. They had walls.
Well, the big civilizations in South America, North America has lower population, and it's much more spread. I'd say decentralized. I think we'd have to agree on that, right?
What, the populations in North America were
lower, and it's generally more decentralized. So it wasn't there weren't like these huge cities
Well,
in
there
North
were
America.
sure
There
there
was
were huge.
there were big ones, but they weren't as compared to South America.
Well, Central America had some of the biggest cities.
Okay.
Tenochtitlan was one of the bigger cities in the world, which is
Yep.
close to. Sorry,
Yeah,
what?
like, wasn't it just as big as, very close in size to like London or like Paris or something, if I remember.
Yeah, I don't remember the details, but it was very big. The Incas were had some pretty complex social organization too. That was a very recent empire that expanded by conquering a bunch of other little states. But civilization goes way, way back in the Americas, but it tended to collapse fairly rapidly probably because there wasn't disease to stabilize it. Like there weren't very many diseases in the Americas. But anyway, I don't want to go off on a huge tangent about that. I think you can make the argument without even getting into these historical questions, which is just from, again, basic logic. Like you don't have a way of solving the free rider problem or the tragedy of the commons or the simple prisoner's dilemma that you have to solve to have a market. Okay, like without the state, you can't just walk into a grocery store and trade with the person there because they have no reason to trust you. They have no, why? Maybe you're walking in with your AR-15 and you're going to take your groceries and walk out. So now they have to maintain some kind of, armed guards, and they have to, like your whole notion of having markets, private property, and like free markets without the state is
private police, private law.
Yeah, so you're assuming that like this whole notion of private police. I mean, like how do you get the police to enforce a law in this anarcho-capitalist society?
Well, the way you do it is that I think that there's the natural law that is based off of don't like murder each other, don't steal from each other. And that's something that all people like basically accept. And then you can have other social norms as well in some societies that all the courts will agree, yes, this is against like all of our like intuitions or whatever, and we'll go against it. So for instance, I think like children and like consent for children is a good example. So you could have like there will be different societies. Some societies will say like 18 is an age of consent. Someone will say like 20 is an age of consent, like South Korea. Okay, and that'll be based off of slightly different intuitions on them, but all the courts in that area will just basically agree. This is like the standard basically, and you could have other things. So I could imagine that some societies would have like insulting one another or like using certain like certain phrases is necessarily a
You're talking about
invitation to have a fight or something like that.
Okay, but you're not answering the question. I mean, the question is, how do you get private police? You're talking about cultural norms, and cultural norms exist.
I'm sorry. I'll get to the point. You're right. Okay. So why they do that is you say, well, we have a profit by enforcing and by having these private police. Well, they provide a service. Okay, people want the service, so they're going to have to provide. They're going to have to pay the policeman. They're going to have to pay the private company that for the police, just like any other service.
Okay.
Okay, and then they'll provide it.
What if you don't pay the tax, the tax that you're describing to the police that are basically the state? What happens then?
Well, polycentric legal orders and polycentric.
The whole polycentric thing is just so silly. I mean, obviously, if you don't pay the police their protection money, they can just come and they're not going to. First of all, they're not going to protect you. And why wouldn't they just take what you have and say, "Oh, that's ours now"?
Well, because then you can have other people make a claim that, okay, well, first they'll lose legitimacy is one thing, and everyone will start thinking that these people are evil pieces of shit, and then they'll organize to destroy them. That's
well, maybe,
one
but
reason.
they're the police. They have
And
the
then,
guns, and maybe they'll just say, "Oh, that guy refused to pay
everyone
for this
can
common
have a
good,
gun.
so he's a piece of shit. So yeah, kill him and take
Everyone
his
has
stuff."
a gun.
I mean, why wouldn't they do that? That's the sort of thing people do all the time.
Wait. So, like for instance, this person didn't give like 2% of his income to charity, so now we're gonna invade him and like destroy all his shit. You mean, right?
No, you're saying that, okay, you're saying there's some private police force, right, that
Yep.
somehow enforces the law, but you have to purchase protection from the
Yep.
private police force, and then supposedly they're going to enforce the law, which I guess they can sort of make up now, right? Because they can decide which laws they're going to enforce. Like, what's gonna?
Well, no, because these private police forces won't be like the most powerful like people in the entire land, because you can hire multiple contractors, you can hire or even just people can just gather with their weapons and they can oppose them. That's another way you could
So you
solve
can have
it,
lots
is
of
if
little
everyone.
gangs, or like the Yanomamo tribes fighting each other.
I mean, again, they wouldn't fight because it's so costly.
So it's just so costly to fight. But you win. When you win, you get to have,
But you'll
you
win.
get all the
You just
stuff.
obviously win every single time. Just obviously.
No, but the point,
The
it doesn't
USSR
matter.
was much bigger than Finland, and yet Finland like slaughtered them by like, what was it, like 100 to 1 casualties? Clearly not worth it from the Soviets' point of view.
Sure, you can lose in war, and you can be wrong about whether you're going to win, but that's not the point.
The point is just go to war, because ignore it if you could lose. Yeah,
No,
sure.
the point is that if there's nobody who has a monopoly on violence in a certain area, then the winning strategy is you form a little gang and you impose a monopoly on violence in that area. Now you get to collect taxes and you get to rule the area.
But you'd have to be able to do that, and unless you like basically indoctrinate everyone, they aren't going to agree to that. Okay.
Well, where have you ever observed? Then why don't we see your utopia in reality? I mean, why don't people overthrow this evil system? Why is everybody evil and paying into it? Because that's what I'm describing is the state, and you're saying that's evil. People wouldn't support that, and yet everybody supports it.
Well, they don't ordinarily support it. Then through indoctrination, through things like religion and constant education, they're incapable of, like, it's like the mental roadblock again. Okay, so people, I think religions are like, especially even if you're a Christian, most religions like for like the Romans, or like the city states religions for like Greece, Rome, then Egypt, and Mesopotamia. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Mesopotamia city states each had a god that was like the main ruler of that city state. Okay, so if you don't have that, then okay, so those are very clearly wrong. Okay, there's clearly not like a legitimate basis for that. So, and I think it's very clear that these religions imposed laws that weren't very helpful, these moral codes that didn't really help society very much. In fact, hurt it a lot.
Well, then why didn't these civilizations get replaced by your utopian thing? By a bunch of polycentric, law firms and governments and police forces and.
Private arbitration is doing pretty well, so is private security in the United States.
Yeah, but that's inside a state-governed society where there's a market for private arbitration and private security, and the market is guaranteed by the state. If you don't if let's say that your private arbitrator colludes with one party to defraud the other, you can then take them to the court, the state court. Right? I mean, what you're describing is something that exists within the overarching power structure of a state-governed society, where there is a market for private security, because there are police that prevent the private security guards from acting like, gangs, rival gangs. But in your hypothetical world without that overarching power structure, what prevents these private police forces from just acting like rival gangs, like mafias?
Well, what prevents them from doing that is, again, war is costly. I mean, I could keep on saying it for you, but
it's not costly if you win. And even if you don't, and even you can't just choose not to fight,
gambling
right?
is costly if you win.
And it's also it's
so ridiculous. Like winning the lottery isn't costly if you win.
Oh my God. The fact that something is costly does not prevent it from happening. There's no magical coordination mechanism.
It's an incentive not to act in a certain way.
No, it isn't. That's what the point of the prisoner's dilemma is, that the dynamics of rational action can lead to a bad outcome for everybody. That's the point, because unless you have an incentive, yeah, it's costly, but in the prisoner's dilemma, everybody chooses to defect and they end up with the worst option. They end up with not the worst possible result for themselves, but they end up with collectively a bad result.
Like it's not like every single thing, every single interaction is like a prisoner's dilemma, because we have things like law. So maybe it would be true that if there was no law, that if you and I...
If there's no law enforcement.
Sure, law enforcement, or, whatever. Okay.
Law is not an incentive unless it's enforced. It doesn't change the payoff matrix unless you enforce it. It's law enforcement that eliminates the prisoner's dilemma or reduces the benefits of defection.
Skip it, because it's necessary for a state to enforce the law to solve the prisoner's dilemma, because private law can't do it.
Well, there has to be somebody who's more powerful than the two players in the game, right? There has to be a third party above them that imposes cooperation on them by coercion. So there has to be a coercive third party to do it. That's the point.
What about between countries?
What?
What about between countries?
Well, between countries, it's kind of a military standoff, right? They can form tit-for-tat relationships, but they don't. If you look at the global situation, it's not what you're describing, right? It's like there are wars all the time, and there's also military standoffs, and there are multinational trade agreements that I agree with, but
I'm glad we can agree on that at least.
Yeah, I'm pro markets, pro capitalism, and pro and anti-war. I don't think war is a good thing, but I don't think that it just disappears by us not wanting it. You can, like, the global situation right now is a nuclear standoff, basically, right? We've had horrific wars in the last century, like almost on a global scale, that killed, over 100 million people in total, I'm pretty sure, if you add them all up, which is still lower than the general death toll from warfare in primitive societies as a percentage of the population.
So really, this argument is just that you accept Steven Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature, and I don't. Really,
I don't agree with Steven Pinker. I think humans are violent.
Well, you don't agree with his Whig theory of history that things necessarily get better, but you do agree that modern states have generally just lowered violence, unlike what we had in the past, which in prehistoric times, which is absurd war mortality rates.
Well, I think primitive societies have very high mortality rates. There were civilizations in the past that had relatively low war mortality rates because they've had very high disease mortality rates. Like, medieval Europe. They had horrific wars, but they weren't really on that large of a scale. But they had, periodic plagues that would wipe out half the population. Same thing in China. But what I'm saying is you need to have some mechanism to create cooperation. That's really what I'm saying. That it's not... And that mechanism that we've come up with is the state. And that the state solves problems of cooperation. It makes it possible for me to walk down the street without worrying that somebody's going to smash me in the head. And the reason why I can walk down the street without worrying that somebody's going to smash me in the head and take my stuff is that I know that people have a strong incentive not to do that, because if they do that, the state will go after them. Mm-hmm. So that's why I can walk into the grocery store, and I don't have to develop a long-term relationship with the grocery store. I can buy from one store and then switch to another, and that's what the open market is that I can switch between different trading partners. I'm not stuck in relationships that I've had to build up over years because I had to establish the trust with a specific person. The state establishes trust by laying out certain rules of exchange and rules of private property. So I can feel confident going into the store that when I swipe my credit card through the little thingy, they're not going to, charge me 3 times what, the amount is for the groceries, or they're not going to, sell me poisoned food or whatever, right? And I trust that they will do that because I know there are incentives for them to do that.
Yeah, like not killing your customers.
No,
but
sure, that might be part of it.
I just find that example like humorous because it just seems obvious to me that stores don't want to kill their customers.
No, you don't want to kill your customers.
The state just comes in and says, "Well, you need to have like all these regulations, and now we have high quality of food." The kind of Upton Sinclair's idea of how the meatpacking industry is just like full of all this like comparatively just unhealthy practices, and only if the state would come in and fix it, now they'll have healthy practices. Working at a restaurant right now, I can just tell you that's obviously false.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you have to like hyper regulate everything to make it work. I'm not saying that. And yes, there are plenty of incentives that are not governmental incentives for companies to provide you with a good deal. Okay, but the fundamental reason why this all works, okay, like somebody could just open up a fly-by-night kiosk and sell bad food and then disappear. There are all kinds of things people could do that we don't have to worry about because the state basically, creates very strong incentives not to do that. And it's a much bigger risk for the grocery store to open its doors and let customers walk in than it is for, the customer to walk into the grocery store, because like if there was no state, then the grocery store would be in danger of people just walking out without paying, right? So then they'd have to employ their own private security, but then people might be afraid to go in because, well, maybe the security guards will shake you down. And even if the store doesn't want the security guards to shake you down, the security guards might want to shake you down, right?
So, yeah, there is an agent representation problem. It's most economists understand that. I guess just another appeal. Just to acknowledge that there are people who think there is a principal agent problem. But what like if they just did shake people down, then I would fire them.
Yeah, but maybe they would shake you down because they're the ones with the guns in your store. And if there's no government, what stops the 5 security guards in your store with the guns from ruling the store? Right? Basically,
thousands of customers.
Well, what are the customers going to do if they're not organized?
Individually take on them. Why not organize for this one case?
Okay, well then, so the biggest gang wins again, right? So once they've organized, why would they?
Then they just break apart. Why not?
Well, because now because they want to prevent it from happening again, right?
So they have like militias, yeah.
Yeah, so no matter what, there's a dynamic that forces people to organize to create a monopoly on violence in a certain area, to impose norms of behavior that are, nicer than a state of nature.
Okay, well, getting more into the state of nature, but I don't think militias, they once they fight the battle, they break apart for the most part. I'm reading a book right now, the Whiskey Rebellion. They try to take on the government, horribly failed. to the point I haven't gone to the end of the book, but if I remember correctly,
are you talking about militias within a larger state structure? Or are you talking about some kind of?
Well, they're going against the state, so the fact that they're in a state structure, they're opposed to the state. So
and they lost.
Oh yeah, they lost miserably.
Well, then what does that? Well, how does that prove anything? Or what's the point then?
Well, it's just an example of how like militias form, and they generally just break apart after they win the battle.
But they lost the battle.
They lost the battle. But they would also form militias to fight Indians. Okay, and then they would, after they won the battle, they would break apart, and then if another tribe started harassing them, form militia, then break apart after they won the battle.
Well, yeah, maybe.
Or you could have the government come in.
Yeah, and they had governments backing them up and enforcing.
Well,
You know?
major complaint though. With
Sorry,
these,
what?
major complaint of these basically Western farmers in Pennsylvania was that they weren't getting help from the state to fight against these Indian tribes who were coming in slaughtering them. Like they had one fort in one county of what they lovingly called West Sylvania, but it didn't really do much. So they
formed a little tribe, kind of like the native tribes, and they fought back in their own way, right? Like, well, why were the native tribes attacking them if war is so costly? What was the point of that?
Native tribes attack them in order to try and keep like their private property.
Oh, so those guys were stealing the private property of the natives using their superior organizational force, their ability to put together a better military.
It's not that like it's not that war can't so between the natives and these colonists, okay, if you guys are trying to steal each other's land, like war will occur. What I'm trying to say is that there's very, very good reasons not to do this. That we intuitively see reasons not to do it. We can just do better by not going to war. It's far less costly.
Yeah, but that's like saying, look, there's a better solution where we cooperate, right? But something has to make that possible. So you could say, hey, look, it'd be better if we both didn't go to war. But if you unilaterally don't go to war and they do, you lose.
Sure.
And if you unilaterally go to war and they don't, you win. So both sides have to militarize. Both sides have to prepare to go to war. And maybe there's a standoff because they're of equal strength, right? But now they've organized and they've paid the price of organizing. So if they can win the battle, they might as well do that to pay for the cost of militarily organizing. There's no, like, you're just saying, hey, it would be cool if this, if we just both pick the cooperate choice in the prisoner's dilemma. But, you both have an incentive to defect. So that you have to change this incentive structure to make.
Yeah, but we have a fundamental disagreement about the possibility of private law and private courts do this, because if that happened, then the private law society could just do whatever it wants. But right now the state can do whatever it wants.
Well, if the private law society can do whatever it wants, then it's effectively a state. If it can enforce the law on people, then it's the state.
Well, no, because the state is like a monopolization over a land, having multiple services available to you, and one land like for you, or I could choose different police services,
But how are you going to? You're missing the point. Like, how are you going to choose these different police services? You're just going to go to one police service and say, okay, I think you guys provide better law than this other guy.
Why are there multiple why is there multiple fast food restaurants that
you have a market that is created by the state that allows you to choose between fast food restaurants.
You're assuming like you can't just answer every objection of trying to give an example of free market.
Well, you can't just claim that the market exists without the state when there's a theoretical reason why it can't, and there's no evidence that it's ever. Sorry, what?
Like when I try to give you examples of like Çatalhöyük, you just say, well,
Çatalhöyük was like 7,000 BC or something, or 5,000 BC. It's a really, really ancient archaeological site.
So
it's one site. There's no evidence for whether they had police or military, or even if they were part of some bigger thing or whatever.
Have any evidence of a hierarchical society, and you just saying you have to if you want to say that it has this hierarchical society, there should be some evidence of it.
Oh no, I don't really care. It's one example. I mean, I don't depend on that example, but your only example is one that isn't even an example.
You're using a logical argument that says that this is necessarily true. So even one example that disproves your logical
Well, yeah,
argument,
if you could find an actual example, sure. It's not an example.
So
it's an example of nothing. It doesn't. There's no evidence for what their society was like. You're saying because the buildings were structured a certain way, therefore there was no hierarchical structure or whatever. That's not really evidence. And
people who had all the power just said, we're just not going to have like any sort of building, or we're not going to use our power in any way.
The whole thing could have been a palace. I mean, you don't even know anything about it. It's just one archaeological site.
There's it's a population size of anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 any given year.
Well, it could have been part of something much bigger. I mean, I'm saying we don't know what was there. We don't know how their society was structured.
It's not Çatalhöyük that has all the power. It's like the neighboring city that we can't find anymore that would come and impose like the.
No, I'm saying whatever existed there is hidden by time. We don't have any record of what their society was like, and you're pointing to this hypothetical example. Okay, I'm saying where we have the actual evidence, where we know what the society was like, there's no examples. So you're claiming there was a hypothetical society that existed in this one place where there's this ancient archaeological site.
Okay, anarchist Pennsylvania. I know much more about anarchist Pennsylvania than I do Ireland.
Anarchist Pennsylvania. Well, okay, you got me there because I don't know much about anarchist Pennsylvania, but I do know that
with William Penn, what he wanted to do is he wanted to incentivize people coming to Pennsylvania to travel to Pennsylvania. Okay, so what he did there was he said, I'm going to not have any sort of taxation. You just go there. There won't be any sort. They didn't have income taxes, obviously, but there will be no excise taxes. There will be no tax on goods or services or imports or anything. And so what they couldn't form was they did have some committee, okay, that would meet. The only problem was that committee had zero power whatsoever to enforce anything. So they had a stateless society.
And how long did that last for?
Well, it lasted for 70 years, and then William Penn decided that he wanted to, start making a profit off of it. And so,
yeah,
okay. No, it's funny. Yeah, I agree. It is funny,
Well, obviously,
finally, I want to make a profit off of it, so now I need to start taxing you people.
Well, obviously, look, I don't know the details of it, all the nitty-gritties, but Pennsylvania isn't some anarchist utopia now. So it obviously didn't work, right?
No anarcho-capitalist or anarchist is saying that, is saying whatever's better, whatever's most preferable is what we'll get. Okay, just as an example you used in certain cases, game theory for the prisoner's dilemma, it might be better for both the prisoners to cooperate, but they don't, and so they both lose. So there are certain circumstances that even though we have an optimal situation, we don't get it. Sometimes we can't. Yeah,
right. That's my whole argument, that the state is it's not optimal in the sense that, hey, it'd be great if we could have all this stuff without the state. But it's necessary to have these things, so it's a price we pay for having markets and having the personal freedom to walk down the street and not worry that you're going to get killed, and being able to go to any store you want, and being able to use a little card to buy your groceries and all that stuff. And the state has given us all of these benefits, and it comes at a cost of we have to pay taxes, and we have some laws imposed on us that we might not like, but that's
we just be this. Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, continue.
Well, I'm just saying that's the solution we've come up with. That's how we've managed to solve these problems, like the tragedy of the commons. Instead of some guy trying to buy up the entire lake, we, create a organized power structure that imposes rules on the use of the lake, and if somebody breaks the rules, this organized power structure punishes that person using its monopoly on violence, using its effective monopoly on violence, which is necessary to control the behavior of the members of that group. And that's the mechanism we use to solve these problems, to make sure that people are going to fight for their country. We don't give them the choice of, hey, you can just live on your land and we'll defend it for you, or you can help us defend it. We just say, no, you have to participate in some way, or we'll take taxes, or we'll draft you into the army. We solve the tragedy of the commons, the free rider problem, and the prisoner's dilemma of personal interaction through the state, and that's what creates the market, and that's what creates large-scale societies where you have a relative degree of individual freedom to engage in exchanging with all kinds of people, because those exchanges are guaranteed by the state, and your ownership of private property is guaranteed by the state. That's my claim.
Okay. I think it's getting a little late.
Yeah, we can wrap it up.
It's been an hour 45 minutes. We've both had our we're repeating ourselves, so I think that this would be a good time to stop. I guess both make short statements on what we thought of the debates, stuff we disagree with one another, and then just wrap it up with that.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm satisfied with this. I think that we have fundamental disagreements on the history of the past, as well as again we always came to Çatalhöyük, and then we came to some native populations, and we disagreed mainly very largely about prehistoric war mortality rate, and how it must necessarily be the case that what limits population growth is either disease or external factors or war. Those are big disagreements. So I think that's where we came to our fundamental disagreements. I didn't think I was clear in some cases, which is unfortunate, but overall, I still think that there's strong evidence to believe that a anarcho-capitalist society is possible. That it is I think we didn't go into this. I think maximize utility, but again, just go into concurrence with our natural intuitions of the world, without making contradictions like, well, the state has to do it because without the state, then without the state, then we're constantly going to be going into war with each other in this small society, and we're not going to be able to have grocery stores or anything because we have this problem of game theory. And I think that's about that. And I hope you have a wonderful night. I hope you didn't. It became heated at some points between one another. I think we interrupted each other, to a reasonable extent. Nothing that was inappropriate overall when we were interrupting each other. Mainly had polite, even though it was heated at some points. And I hope that you wouldn't be against having another conversation sometime in the future, because I thought this was an interesting talk.
Yeah, I think really, yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it, and it did get heated, but that's pretty typical in these things.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I stand by everything I said, and I think I said it really clearly in the article, and I think that you're making the fallacies that I described, and the biggest one, I guess, is just assuming that things that exist in this system would exist without the state. Like assuming that this polycentric law notion that you could have, there'd be a market for the police, which is kind of it's circular, because you need the police to have private property in the market, right? So you need the police to enforce the rules of the market, so there's no market for police, right? Because you have to have the police to have the market. And so, but I felt like we probably should have gotten more into that specific thing, and I wanted to talk more about the Rothbard, like the specific arguments of Rothbardian, whatever that is, like whatever you're referring to, because I haven't read him, and so
I'm just on private courts and private police services and
why. I think that's all based on a question-begging fallacy, where you assume that markets exist, and then you claim that you can have the things necessary for markets come out of the market, but you beg the question by assuming the market exists in the first place. I'm not sure if I made that argument clearly, but...
I think you did, so you should be happy.
Well, I probably didn't do the best job making it, but that's my basic point there. And yeah, maybe in the future we can have a discussion about that or other things. I apologize if I was a little bit... I did get a little bit annoyed a couple of times. I don't know, it just seemed like...
I don't hold it against you. I got annoyed too. So,
all right, that's fine. That happens in these debates.
Yeah, absolutely. When we briefly talked to each other before, I'll say it again. You seem like a very polite person and nice person, and I'm glad to be able to have these conversations with you, where we don't take ourselves where we can come to some agreements at least. I would hope.
Yeah, I'm sure we can all. Well, I'm sure we agree on some things, but the interesting stuff is what we disagree on, right? So
maybe another time we could talk about something we agree on, and then we could go back, and then we go back to the things we disagree on, because that way, we have more trust in friendliness in each other. It could be something interesting.
We didn't establish the tit for tat. You see, this is the problem. We didn't establish the reciprocal tit-for-tat relationship with a friendly interaction. Anyway, it's getting late here and it's pretty late there, so we should probably call it a night. Good talking to you.
Have a wonderful night.